Welcome to the plantation. I'm your host, Master Lou. I've taken a break out of posting videos. I know it's been a while, plantation community, and I formally apologize. I celebrated my 40th birthday in December. Yes, can you believe it? A brother like me is 40 years old. Unbelievable. People think this is some astronomical idea that I am not 40. Yes, I may look young. I am 40, I'm still young, and I'm still energetic. And I guess with age comes wisdom, as well as with wisdom comes the evolution of the mind. And yes, it was absolutely amazing, wonderful. At a celebration with friends, much needed. And then also, this year being my year that I'm doing my honors degree, that is also taking up time. Hence, you might have not seen the multitude of videos that are coming up on my YouTube channel. However, I will be continuing to post these videos on a more frequent basis. So I will be getting in touch and becoming more active again on YouTube. If you don't see me posting any videos on my YouTube channel, Plantation community, please do me a favor. Please subscribe to my writing so you can find my academic opinion pieces. They are written and published on LinkedIn. They are also published on Substack, and they are also published on Medium. I will paste the links in the subject of my video itself. You'll find them there, and then you can just go onto the various links and subscribe. Please do read my content. It's very informative, it's very direct, and it's very thought-provoking. Nonetheless, let's look at some of the international affairs. As you know, international relations is my specialty, and I also look at the geopolitics. Now we have to understand the invasion of Venezuela, which is very, very critical for a lot of people. Yes, there's a lot being said about the invasion of Venezuela, as well as the capturing of their leader, Maduro. However, the US government always acting like a motherfucking bully. They are never complying with international law. So let us understand what transpired here. Now, this is according to the UK Guardian. They stated that since September 2025, the United States has been deploying and also been sending unprecedented naval armada to the waters off Venezuela throughout the Caribbean as well, as part of Washington's call for anti-drug trafficking campaign. How ironic. The United States is one of the biggest drug-consuming nations in the world, and yet Washington itself launches an anti-drug trafficking campaign. For example, doesn't the United States collect the revenue of the cartels for all the drug shipments that they seize, as well as the illicit trade of drugs over the Mexican border? Come on, man, make that make sense. You're launching an anti-drug trafficking campaign, and yet your nation is one of the largest as well as highly rated drug consuming nations in the world. Didn't the United States also have an opioid epidemic back in the 90s as well, with the introduction of heroin? The same thing that happened in Afghanistan. With the invasion of Afghanistan, what does Afghanistan grow that is needed in the production of heroin? Very interesting. I think it's called opium. Now, that pandemic is a critical component from the drug enforcement of the United States. For example, one of their agencies, as we all know from the series Narcos, as well as watching a lot of these Latin American films that involve drug trafficking, you will always hear about the DEA, Drug Enforcement Agency, a very prolific and very bullying and very direct drug enforcement agency that deals with narcotics. So the same can be said about the US government. Why are you launching an anti-drug trafficking campaign, and yet your country is one of the nations that consumes drugs the most in the world? That is very, very strange and very, very ironic. However, critics like the human rights organizations for that matter, as well as legal experts, they argue that these strikes actually involve extrajudicial killings as well as war crimes, because they apparently lack transparency and legal justification and no due process. Now, in parallel with these particular strikes of the United States in the Caribbean and also off Venezuela, what we must also understand is that the US military and the United States Coast Guard itself, they have intercepted and seized Venezuelan-linked oil tankers in international waters. And then also actions have been also condemned by Caracas and some foreign governments as violation of international law. Now we understand. So you intercepting Venezuelan oil tankers, you and your Coast Guard, and then on top of that, you're doing this in international waters. Plus, you're also violating international law. So where is the clapback for that? Where is the clapback for the violation of international law? How can you seize a sovereign nation's oil tankers in international waters and then expect nothing to be done? Now, this particular approach is very forceful, it's bullying, and it violates a lot of protocols listed under international law. Now, what we can detest from this approach from the United States government as well as Washington and the anti-drug trafficking campaign is that this was the largest covert operation from US military in the Latin America itself since the 1989 invasion of Panama. Now, the speed and scale of this particular operation is very, very interesting. Apparently, it sends shockwave not only through the regional Latin America, this sent shockwaves throughout the international community. We can understand that South Africa has been involved with the International Criminal Court in taking Israel for its war crimes as well, or genocide, like they want to label it these days, for their atrocities on human beings. Now, why are we not having the same smoke for the United States? We take Israel, which is an ally of the United States, we take them to the International Criminal Court for their war crimes against humans, and yet we're seeing the very same effect from the United States. United States has invaded a number of countries in the Middle East before, resource driven. We know there's oil, there's also opium in Afghanistan, and I believe that Afghanistan is also one of the largest, or should I say the largest opium producer and grower on earth. So we could understand what the invasion of Afghanistan meant and why they strategically deployed the military as well as special armed forces to that region so that they can get their hands on the opium. Now we must also know that particular ingredient is heavily used in the production of heroin, and this leads us to the 90s drug introduction that caused the epidemic in the US, where people were consuming huge and vast amounts of crack, and I think cocaine as well, but I do know that opium is a key ingredient for the production of heroin. And guess what? Afghanistan has that resource. Besides oil and other stuff in the Middle East, that country has this particular specific ingredient that is ideally suited for the production of heroin. So now we understand you got an anti-drug trafficking campaign, yet you invaded a country that has the key ingredient for heroin. How strange and how pathetic. Nonetheless, now this was noted as the largest covert operation since US military action in Latin America since the invasion of Panama in 1989. That's what we understand the veracity of the United States entering Venezuela, a sovereign nation, capturing its leader Maduro and his wife, and then taking them back to the United States to face trial for their crimes against humanity. And I believe the US government and the intelligence stating that this gentleman was indeed a dictator. Now what we need to understand, the US way of doing things is that you have a neo-colonial country with the largest military industrial complex entering a sovereign nation, capturing their leader, and then on top of that, they go to indoctrinate the people by introducing the concept about Western liberal democracy. As you know, liberalism and also neoliberalism has all the less interference from the state. So that means your private individual rights is regarded more and more valuable and more acceptable than that those around you. And this is why we state this clearly. The United States is built upon immigration. The United States is built upon the acquisition, the illegitimate acquiring of land, as well as the invasion of other territories to grow their national strategic interest. This forms part of their foreign policy. We can understand that they are very much involved in the affairs of other countries. I do not understand what is the purpose of the United States being the bully of the world. It makes no sense. Now, taking me back to the International Criminal Court case against Israel, we also need to understand we have to apply the same logic and the same level of enthusiasm. Taking their ally to court, we also have to do that for the United States. But somehow, it seems to me, the EU is afraid of the United States. BRICS is afraid of the United States. Maybe, maybe not. Latin America has now been scared by the invasion of Venezuela and capturing the leader. We don't know what the clapback is. I do know that China is supporting there with additional military support, as well as Russia as well. So these are two key stakeholders involved in the geopolitical region of Venezuela, where the United States is wanting to take full control and manage and run the country with their Western liberal ideas. That's one part of it. Now the allies and adversaries alike were reeling at the sheer brazenness of Washington's interference in another sovereign state. Strangely enough, how the fuck did we get here? I asked myself that question. How did we get here? I mean, since the beginning of Donald Trump's second term, he has placed Nicolas Maduro at the center of his intensified campaign. Maximum pressure, whereby strategically targeting the Venezuelan government, framing Caracas as a destabilizing force in the Western Hemisphere and a source of drugs as well as irregular migration into the United States. This explains why Donald Trump, in his first term at office, wanted to build a wall to keep out the immigrants. Now we've got ICE capturing all Latin Americans across the country and then deporting them back to where they come from. With that all said and done, well and done, you must also understand the human aspect. A lot of these ICE people are extremely violent towards humans, and in many cases they do not know how to engage and deal with humans at a social level and at a more patient level. So because I'm an ICE agent, I'm here to enforce immigration law from the United States, I will act in a manner that puts me at the top. So therefore, if you don't have papers, or you are not a US citizen, I will therefore engage in you by force, and therefore by means of specific violence, by means of killing you, by means of causing any harm to you. That is how I act out the immigration policy of the United States. Now that is a very distorted foreign policy, as well as that is a very distorted policy for immigration, because when dealing with immigrants, you need to follow due process. There is the respect for sovereignty, and there's also respect for human life. You cannot engage with an immigrant in a manner that's like you're dealing with a bunch of terrorists. That's the difference, which the United States does not seem to want to understand. Now we can also detest that from that itself. In August 2025, the US government publicly offered a reward for up to $50 million for information leading to the leader of Venezuela's arrest or conviction. I mean, this was the largest bounty ever. Think of it like that, under Washington's narcotics program. Now, senior officials accusing him of being among the world's most significant narco traffickers. I wonder who those senior leaders are. They better come forward. And a threat to the United States security, or should I say the US national security, like they want to call it these days. Now, Maduro and his allies specifically have consistently rejected these accusations as politically motivated, we do understand, and without credible evidence. So there is no prima facie evidence to say that, yes, Venezuela is one of the world's most strategic narco traffickers, and also it has a multitude of illegal immigrants coming from Venezuela to the US, which hampers the development of the United States because of the narcos trafficking, or should I say the drug trafficking. Now, in that particular claim, what we must also understand the rationale behind it. The use of force by the US government, we should not conveniently forget that many global atrocities involving the United States, like I mentioned before in my conversation, have never been subjected to any form of scrutiny. Now, on the one hand, we can condemn Israel and keep going with the violations of international law and then invoke the authority of the ICC. And then on the other hand, why are we tolerating the United States running its mouth over sovereign nations and also dealing with its adversaries as well as its designates. Now, that for me is a double standard. On the one hand, you cannot do one thing for its ally and then also leave the other one alone. So therefore, we need to pick up our socks and we need to be forceful. We need to also file a case at the International Criminal Court for the atrocities that the United States have done, not only towards Venezuela. We have to consider all the invasion of the Middle East countries that were part of the foreign policy under the Bush administration before 2007, as well as before Obama years. We also need to take into consideration the bombing of Libya under the administration of Barack Obama. So therefore, that's a whole list of international law violations. Those are war crimes. Those are sovereign nations being threatened, sovereign nations being bombed, sovereign nations being invaded. The list is fucking endless. Now, with that double standard being indefensible, the same conduct of the United States under the Donald Trump administration cannot be selectively applied. Therefore, based on power, alliances, or convenience. Now we understand the velocity of why the United States has invaded Venezuela, captured their leader and his wife, sent them back to the United States to face trial. We can also understand there's a lot of strategic national interest at play here because, after all, United States is a resource-hungry country. So if you have something that they desire, they will figure out a way to either get you or get to you. In all fairness, I feel that specific countries need to take action against this international law violations, and the same enthusiasm needs to be applied. If you're going to take the ally, you need to take the US to the ICC as well. Now, back in South Africa, on the global stage, we need to also understand that South Africa's interaction with the United States at the G20 was not so welcoming. Yes, United States boycotted the G20 for specific reasons, and therefore our president gaslighting as always, we shall not be bullied. Yes, Cyril Ramaphosa, we shall not be bullied. On the one hand, we need to also understand that South Africa is intimidated by the historical and economic power of the United States. This is why we open our strategic borders for businesses of the US to set up infrastructure and set up their operations here in South Africa. That just states it clearly. South Africa is intimidated by the historical and economic power of the United States, or it is being co-opted on both sides through trade. Remember the AGOA, not too long ago, the fight to remain in that duty or special preference access market to the United States through AGOA. Well, in other areas, we're looking at investment. We're also looking at promises as well as job creation. Now, both these scenarios, they actually reflect a failure of political courage and moral clarity. So therefore, I'm not sure why our president is quiet. Mr. Cyril Ramaphosa, the gaslighting leader of this country that is running a mafia state. Yes, I said that South Africa is a mafia state. It's run by a bunch of criminal cabals. What we cannot understand is the rampant corruption happening at the top, and yet there's no accountability. Not too long ago, the National Director of Public Prosecutions, she had finished her term, and what report is there for South Africa? What can we say what has done? The Matlanga Commission is still ongoing. We had the Zondo Commission, that happened already, still nothing. So therefore, I feel that our entire state is run by a mafia organization. So we can call ourselves a criminal organization. They operate the very same way like a private company that seeks revenue and profits through capitalism. That is exactly the symbolic way that our country is being run. We don't have the right people. We don't have the right decision making on board, and this is why we have this constant failure in South Africa. It's not the lack of voter education or the voter not understanding what to vote for. It doesn't matter if you vote for the same party or a different party. The devil is a devil, and it doesn't matter how you dress it. You can dress the devil in Gucci, Prada, Versace. That is still the damn devil. Now, if South Africa feels that way, and that is their position that they're taking through to intimidation by the United States and its economic power, then I feel sorry. Grow some balls, Mr. Ramaphosa. Grow some balls. Now, in that scenario, we must also understand that you cannot serve two masters. International law is meant that everyone and every sovereign nation needs to subscribe to it. That's why we have the Roman Statute. It must be equally applied as well as for its allies and other sovereign nations of the United States that engages in trade and investment. It has to be applied throughout. Now, what is South Africa's foreign policy for 2026? Multilateralism and non-alignment. Come on, Deco, you can do better. Regional leadership of the South African Development Community. As incoming chair, South Africa is poised to steer the SADC Troika in responding to the deepening security crisis in Mozambique as well as the DRC. We can understand the major conflict in the eastern part of the DRC between the M23 or M27 rebels and the Rwandan government. Not too long ago, I came across some information stating that the Rwandan government is benefiting from the illicit trade of gold with the M23 rebels. Very interesting. And the leader of the Rwandan government is completely mum. You guys both signed the Washington Accord in Washington and not in Africa. You signed that Washington Accord, which comprises a peace deal between DRC and Rwanda, but this was signed in the United States. Since when do you sign a peace deal that is meant for two African countries to resolve internal conflict that have been ongoing for decades? You signed it in the United States. Part of the package deal was that the Democratic Republic of Congo, they then issued mineral rights as part of the deal. Remember, United States needs cobalt for the iPhones. If there's no cobalt, we have no iPhones. Part of that deal, mineral rights. How disgusting is that of an African country in exchange for peace with conflict of another African nation, you decide to give up mineral rights. No wonder they're after our minerals too. Now, on the other hand, part of the outlook is economic and diplomacy and risk. We must understand with AGOA, like I mentioned, the benefits were restored back in 2026. Hoorah! Pretoria is once again attempting to hedge its bets, now deepening the trade with the Western partners. Strangely enough, why are we deepening our trade with Western countries and less with African countries? Are we that pathetic as South Africans? Or should I say, are we that pathetic as our government in charge that we cannot trade with our own African nations? We got more than 1 billion plus people on the continent of Africa, and we can't even achieve 30% trade with all regions across the continent. Yet we increasing our trade with countries the likes of US and the likes of UK and the likes of China. What I cannot understand, all these countries are engaging in some form of resource acquisition. So on the one hand, you want to trade with us and you want to build infrastructure, and on the other hand, we need to give you strategic resources. That's the same relationship between the slave master and the slave. South Africa, you're the slave here. Your slave master is the UK, the United States. China, well, that's the yellow man. I think they will also be classified as a slave master. Hidden slave master, of course. Part of that is the human rights posturing. This is part of the foreign policy outlook for 2026, and also the internal foreign policy contestation. Now we also understand that South Africa is returning to the Human Rights Council. That will be from the year 2026 up until the year 2028. Now that is a good thing. This is a recommitment to the constitutional values of South Africa as well as international human rights. Now remember, what we need to understand is that not too long ago in 2026, the African Union also deepened its institutional and strategic partnership with the Federal Republic of Nigeria. Now this is across multiple fronts. These include institutional integration. This was convened at the 39th African Union Summit. They also have peace and security cooperation. There's also health and sector reforms. Very interesting. This is part of the ongoing African Union model on law on medical products regulation. Very well done to the AU. Now collectively, these initiatives, they do illustrate a multidimensional African Union. Nigeria, that spans its partnership with financial governments. We all know what's happening in northern Nigeria with the killings of the Christians and the Muslims basically annihilating them. So we understand the involvement from the US military in northern Nigeria. Now, with this being said, Nigeria's partnership that includes financial governance, security cooperation, and regulatory reform. This reinforces Nigeria's leadership itself with a role on the continent as well as strengthening their institutions. Now, on a lighter note, what I don't understand, why is South Africa still sitting in the BRICS membership block? Is there any benefit to us? I don't see Deco publishing any information that relates to the benefit of why South Africa should remain in BRICS. I don't know, maybe the bloc was just formed for the sake of the name BRICS. Sound more like building a house. BRICS. I don't know. I don't see the significance there. I don't see South Africa's foreign development growing at a rapid rate. I don't see our national influence or our strategic influence across regional areas across the continent of Africa influencing, and I also don't see us creating a massive comparative advantage to our counterparts in Ghana, Nigeria, Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso. I don't see that. So what is the purpose of having BRICS? Why can't we just form a unilateral body on the continent that represents all the states on the continent, all the nations, and then we combine our efforts and then we create a African body of trade? Yes, the African Free Trade Area Agreement that was established, but I don't see the fruits being paid from that implementation. But for me, it's a waste of paper, a waste of time, a waste of effort, and a waste of knowledge. Now, as we are heading into the local government elections this year, we need to understand there's a so-called neoliberal alternative to the communistic ANC that's out there. We call themselves the Democratic Alliance. Now, once again, this is political relics floating around by Helen Zille, the mayoral contender for the city of Johannesburg. Now, what I cannot understand, this is not renewal. This is just political failure. The Democratic Alliance understanding and their implementation of generational change, I don't see anything. This is unimaginable that you'll have a lady of this age, that old, that is running for mayoral candidate of the city of Johannesburg, where the richest square mile in Africa is contained, and you want to tell me you either have a dinosaur or you have a mummy that's contending for mayorship. For me, that's a failure. Where is the youth of South Africa involved in these strategic leadership roles? Where is the upcoming person that is not tied to any political party or specific interest at play, that is young, that is vibrant, that has the energy? And also we need new ideas. You want to tell me a neo-colonial, neoliberal party like the Democratic Alliance itself, that this is the best that they could present to South Africa to run the city of Johannesburg? Get the fuck out of here, woman. Get the fuck. You need to go back into retirement. You need to either chill and need to back off. You need to back off. Allow other people the opportunity. Stop acting like a slave master and a slave owner. It's 2026, not the 1920s, not the Native Land Act period, and definitely we are way past 994, Miss Helen Zille. So therefore I ask you as a South African, please do not put yourself in the race for mayor, because I feel that someone else can do a better job. If they cannot do a better job, at least let it be someone with a different level of energy, a different level of thinking, and a different level of strategic direction, so that the city of Johannesburg grows, evolves, and multiplies. Now, what we must also understand is the following, that to me, that is hypocrisy from a party like the Democratic Alliance. The same party that cried foul over the inefficiencies of the African National Congress is the very same party that is keeping this incumbents in power. Yes, back in 2019, the Democratic Alliance were crying foul and stating, yes, but the ANC is corrupt, their leadership is corrupt, the theft and the maladministration of public funds has been rampant. Look today, that very same DA is keeping the ANC in power, that forms part of the government of so-called national unity. Now, what we need to know about these local government elections that are happening this year is that these elections are not just to be about personalities or recycled political brands. We must understand that this is purely about service delivery. So when you go and you vote for a political party and a councillor that will be running and managing your ward, make sure that your decision is based upon service delivery and communal benefit and communal growth. After all, that is what matters. Not a personality. We don't care who you are. You can be Alan Zilla, Cyril Ramaphosa. We don't give a flying fuck. What we want is to get the job done so that our people have services delivered to the destitute communities. Don't send me an image about Cape Town being the best city in the world. Fuck all of that. That for me is neoliberal. We need to focus on what we're going to do in the now. How are we going to fix our communal problems? How are we going to get services directed to all these destitute communities? We cannot be politically grandstanding and putting the image of Cape Town up there and stating, no, this is on the same level of the likes of New York, Monaco. No. You can have it as the best city in the world, but yet people are living in fucking abject poverty. Abject fucking poverty. You go along there into abject poverty. There are shacks. There are informal settlements galore. You fly over with the airplane. On the one end, you've got plush greenery, and on the other end, you just have a destitute environment. So how do we as South Africans explain that as something that we are proud of? The Western Cape government, as well as the DA, you created this problem of rampant inequality for a very long time. Since before the 1950s, when you also implemented the Group Areas Act by relocating and displacing large portions of communities and then moving them to marginalized areas, we can see today in the spatial planning from the city of Cape Town of how land is being sourced for specific development. So you created this mess. So in order for us to actually work together and grow, we need to address that part of the mess that was created. So in all fairness, I don't think that the DA is an alternative solution to South Africa, because the neoliberal ways of doing things are still creating further inequality. The companies have become richer, the wealthier has become more wealthier, and the poorer are just getting poorer. We don't care that you're governing well in the Western Cape and the roads are clean. What about all the township areas? What about the Cape Flats? What about all the areas that are run down? Have you attempted? Have you done anything strategic that to make these communities flourish? No, I don't see anything. Yes, as humans, we may also be accountable for the destruction of our own environment. Yes, before we blame government, we need to hold ourselves accountable as a community. Look at the rampant crime. Now we need to deploy the South African National Defence Force, as stated by Mr. Gaslight himself, President Cyril Ramaphosa, that they will be deploying this to the Cape Flats, especially for gang-ridden communities and areas. How did it get to that point? If a mafia is running your country, then that mafia will spread that energy of the way they run the country that filters down into the communities. Just like a multinational company gets wealthy by generating revenue, making profits, none of that trickles down. So very thing and the very same can be said about our communities. Nothing trickles down. Now, with regards to that solution in relation to service delivery, there's also crime. And not too long ago, yes, they made the announcement they are going to build a 180 million rand wall on the N2 to combat crime. Now remember, building walls might be the answer to crime. As if concrete barriers is going to substitute for coherent policy and functional institutions. This is the same tired divide and conquer logic. You securitize social failure, you externalize blame, and then second to that, you offer a spectacular moment instead of solutions. So think about it. You will have a beautiful looking wall, but what about the solution to crime? Are you addressing the root cause of the crime? No, you're not. You're just applying a band-aid. And guess what? We don't want the tourists to see how bad the sacks look. So therefore, let's erect a wall, just like Donald Trump wanted to do in the United States. Now, secondly to that, as Prince Mashele stated on the Hustlers Corner, He says this following: we are no longer in the era of the past, and this is what we need to understand. The moment demands alignment for what we can currently do and get done now. Practical, grounded interventions, not to cycle politics dressed up as a unique strategy. You're going to fix the education system, that is non-negotiable. If you are serious about long-term national recovery, we must confront our collapsing literacy rates in the country, aggressively strengthen mathematics, science, engineering, and related STEM disciplines. Starting at the foundational level, preschool, primary school, through to high school, automatically weak foundations will be addressed. Now that will then produce predictable outcomes. Now you cannot expect a strong progression in pure mathematics or science or statistics when learners fail at the earliest stages of their development. So that is one core function in order to get our society back on track and get them productive. At the same time, we need to also look at civic education and must be treated as a core component of schooling, not an afterthought. Children should be taught about the real socioeconomic impact of illegal immigration. That's one thing that also I'm passionate about. Illegal immigration. Shout out to Operation Dudula and shout out to March and March. And what is lawful? Constructive civic engagement that looks like in addressing it within the South African context, especially within the constitutional framework. Now, this is all about building an informed society, not only outsourcing the responsibilities to slogans or fear politics. Now, remember, I am an African and a South African by nationality. If you don't respect our culture, you don't respect our people, and you don't respect our contribution and values as a nation, then you only have two options. It's either you futsek or Abahambe. Once again, thank you for listening to The Plantation. I do appreciate it, and thank you for supporting my channel. Cheers.